Hello everyone, my name is Alex and this is Creative Philosophy. So today, instead of going through any of the philosophical or theological issues or topics, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my Oxford interview. I applied for theology and philosophy and I had 4 interviews last week. So I just wanted to kind of give you a background of what the interview was like and what I thought about the interviews, whether I thought straight after that I did I did pretty good, I performed good, or I messed up. So um, the thing about Oxford interviews, guys, you should not prepare an answer to your questions. I mean that sounds pretty odd, but I mean that technically, you cannot prepare answers, general answers to your question. The best thing to do, I think, is that have a um, general knowledge of philosophy and kind of um, have examples in your mind about different philosophical issues. And I think examples are really important. I think what you could do to improve the performance of your interview is to read as much philosophy as you can, as broadly as possible. And why I say as broadly is because really philosophy, if you read all the main philosophical themes broadly, just kind of familiarize yourself with it, then the sort of questions you will come across, you will already have kind of as an idea what the debate is about. Whereas if you go to an Oxford interview and they ask you about the concept of the Trinity or a philosophical issue, then you're kind of shocked. You kind of because you've never been exposed to it, you can't. You might find it more difficult to tackle those questions. Having said that, I think it's still possible to go to an interview without having done any philosophy, but if you have sort of a critical analytical ability to tackle questions, whether they're philosophical, whether they're scientific, then you will do really well. But my suggestion is to read as broadly as you can, and at the same time try to specialize in something. So my school offered EPQ, for example, and so I could specialize on the question of the resurrection of Christ. And I did other works, such as some of my existentialist works, and I focus on these two main issues, and I kind of specialize in these two ideas. One in philosophy and another in theology. And so try to do that. Try to specialize in a really narrow area, but at the same time, try to build your knowledge um, really broadly. So when you go into an interview, I think that the most important thing in an interview is basically you given the most important part of an interview isn't based on your personal statement. Having said that, your personal statement is still really important, but because Oxford and Cambridge try to put everyone on an equal footing, then I think they do the right thing that they give you a text before your interview, and you've never came across that text, and nobody has. So you kind of have to stand up on your feet and um, kind of answer those questions as you go along, and you have to trust your common sense, your rationality, your approaches you take. One thing I suggest to you to do is that to learn the kind of the certain things in philosophy that are centered around valid arguments. I think this is probably the most important things you could do if you want to do well in an interview, because forms um, and the validity of arguments aren't necessarily constrained to a certain topic. They're more general. So I could give you an example. The ad hominem fallacy, for instance. I mean, most people are familiar with it, but there are a whole range of fallacy which you could familiarize yourself with it. And if you are given a text at Oxford, then you could perhaps go through that text, and you probably given the question whether you think the argument is valid or whether you think it's invalid, or whether you agree with the conclusion. So if you learn those type of fallacies generally, and what constitutes a valid argument, then I think you build structures in your mind, or in your brain, or in your rational thinking, and these structures aren't constrained to a certain topic. They're just, you could apply them to anything. So the ad hominem, for example, is if there are any explicit or implicit reference to the person's personality, even character, even the approach that they take, and kind of an attack, whether implicit or explicit, um, under under character or personality, instead of addressing their argument, or argument from authority. So if someone puts an argument that because they have PhD, therefore somehow they're more kind of the argument is more valid. These things constitute logical fallacies. I mean, there are hundreds of logical fallacies: the naturalistic fallacy, the red herring, the genetic fallacy. If you familiarize yourself with these arguments and kind of learn how philosophical arguments work in general, like inductive, deductive arguments, and how and once you learn that, I think the next thing to do is to learn as many examples as you can with regards to topics you have mentioned in your personal statements, as well as kind of building a general storage of examples. I think examples are very, very important, guys. Do not underestimate the importance of having examples in your mind, because examples, what I mean by examples are, you don't have to kind of go and read philosophy in order to know any examples, but you just have to know what's going on around the world. So if you don't know that adulterers are being stoned in Saudi Arabia, this is the constitution of Saudi Arabia that punishes women who have committed adultery by stoning, or you don't know that cultures have different morality, or you're not aware of the different philosophical issues happening. You don't necessarily need to know the details of those philosophical issues. You need to know some examples. You got to have some analogies in your mind. Analogies, again, are perfect example, perfect tool for you to demonstrate your knowledge and ability to think critically, analytically, and creatively. I mean, I have probably not used as many analogies in my interview, and the thing about the interviews is that they're really short, so they're about 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even 25 minutes maximum, and basically they dedicate a great chunk of the interview on the pre-reading interview that you've done. So you kind of have to think on your feet, and that's the key thing to do. One thing, if you want to prepare, especially for philosophy and theology interviews or any of the humanities, I think, is to practice discussing your ideas with your friends. I mean, this is I hadn't done this, and I regret not doing it. And I mean, I've started having my own YouTube channel called the Langton Report at my school, where we bring teachers, speakers, and students kind of together to discuss ideas. And if you check my main YouTube channel, the Langton Report, you will see the different discussions we've been having. And I think whether you like to have informal or formal discussions, I think both of those are very valuable. The sort of things you need to learn and you need to develop are your skills, not the knowledge necessarily. As I said, knowledge matters. If you have done some work in the past, mention your personal statement, and try to be specific in your personal statement about the works you've done. Don't say that you've read thousands of books. Try to say you've read a couple of books on a specific topic. For example, my personal statement. In my personal statement, I wrote that I had read some existentialist works, such as Sartre's Existentialism and Humanism, or Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, and Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And so I kind of narrowed it down to a specific area, so that if I'm asked a question, I can confidently answer those questions with a great wealth of knowledge. Whereas if you just say, I've read hundreds of books and I've read all these things and I've wrote many essays, I've written many essays, then you're increasing your chances of getting trapped, right? And so, as much as your personal statement matters, try to learn your general skills. One being your communication skills, and the second being your kind of general examples that you come across in philosophy, in law, in any of the humanities subjects you do, even in sciences. I mean, one of the things that is similar to any discipline is being able to think and look at different issues from different angles, and not to just to read something and take it as valid. Is to take things apart and kind of go into the details of everything. So, for example, one of the texts I was given in an interview had included some examples of societies where they had practiced immoral actions according to what we understand as immoral. And the text had put the practice of the Nazis, cannibalism, and the criminals in the same category. So in one sentence, he had put I don't remember the exact argument, but it went something along these lines that its overall argument was that because different societies have different sense of morality, and these were the examples: Nazism, cannibalism, and criminals in different societies. And I pointed out, you cannot put those examples together. Those examples are uniquely different. Each of them have their own context, their own kind of reason why they happen. Even cannibalism happens in Soviet, and people knew very well what they were doing because they had because the society was based on Judeo-Christian values. Even if it wasn't based on Judeo-Christian values, people knew very well that those practices were evil. But because of severe conditions, they were forced into cannibalism. Whereas this different society, an isolated society that has never had contact to, let's say, the Western world, then they have more moral justifications for us. So even cannibalism itself, you have to take it apart, categorize it, try to think of a term and define it. Try to say there are different definitions, and the text doesn't give a clear definition of these words. And so this is what I mean by analytical and critical thinking: is to really, really think about every word you read in the pre-interview text. I think that's the important thing you have to be careful. Is that, for example, for the first interview didn't read very carefully every word that I read. And the thing about the pre-interview reading is that don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid that you won't have enough time to read them, because you will have enough time. They give you tons of time. They give you something like 10 to 20 minutes to read a page. And so just be very careful in your reading. And so when you read, try to read every word very carefully and see what the writer is trying to get at by writing those words. And just don't take them as granted. Don't just skim read them. Read them very carefully, make as much note as you can, and kind of summarize the arguments of the text in your interview.